some ideas for integrating a range of activities along a framework into your work with students and employers, as well as examples of some of the supports required to implement those activities. We think this information will be useful to a broad range of folks, but have focused our audience for today's webinar on K-12 educators, teachers, counselors, work-based learning intermediaries, and work-based learning coordinators. So the folks who are working to prepare students for the world of work and connecting them to the world of work. We'll quickly run through some just background information about Jobs for the Future for those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization. JFF was founded in 1983 with the goal of making sure all lower-income young people and adults have the skills and credentials necessary to enter, advance, and succeed in our economy. We work across the country, across many different age groups and populations, and work with folks who are building meaningful bridges between education and workforce. We do this by developing interventions and innovations that are backed by evidence and research. We build the capacity of people on the ground who are actually doing this important work, and we serve as champions for good policy measures that will move the work forward. Sheila and I, as mentioned before, work on a team at JFF called Pathways to Prosperity. And the Pathways to Prosperity Network is a network of over 12 states and regions, both rural and urban, and we focus on scaling grades 9 to 14 integrated academic and career pathways. Our work is not about developing new programs or add-on reform agendas, but is more about the strategic alignment and bolstering of existing initiatives to improve education, workforce, and economic outcomes in states and regions. Our goal as the P2P network is to align systems in a way so that young people experience smoother transitions between high school, post-secondary, and career, and that all young people have access to the kinds of opportunities that launch them into meaningful careers that leave open the option of further education. We believe that we can accomplish these things through focusing on the 4 key implementation levers that you see here. Our first lever is focused on engaged employers, which we'll talk a bit about today. The second is sustained career information and advising. Both of those 2 levers, employers and career information and advising, are directly related to the subject of work-based learning, which we'll talk about today. We also believe that it's important to build the capacity of intermediaries who are connecting the worlds of education and business, as well as facilitating those conversations between education and employers. And finally, we advocate for and inform policies that provide the infrastructure and funding to support our work. This might be something like a flexible seat time policy, early access to college-level coursework, and funding for staffing this kind of work.
Okay, so today we are going to zero in on the nuts and bolts, or really the gears, as you see here, that make work-based learning work in this setting of in-school use in kind of grades 9 through 14, accelerated career pathways that serve all students. And we've separated the key components to focus on into goals and vision, staff and supports, and employer partnerships. So this first piece around setting your goals and vision for work-based learning is crucial. And if you're just starting a work-based learning program, this is, the first place to start, and that's great. But even if you already have one that's up and running and you're revising or revisiting your goals, it's definitely still a worthwhile exercise to make sure that there is a clear vision and some goals that are informing how your work-based learning program is designed and structured. And as you can see here, you can start with some just very basic level questions that we would suggest a group of stakeholders involved could together answer. And one of the most important reasons why articulating your goals and vision at the onset is because when we're talking about work-based learning for youth, we're inevitably talking about limited resources, changing mindsets among educators and employers to make work-based learning happen. And so you're inherently not going to be able to do everything you want to do at once. So setting your goals is a good way to prioritize both the short-term things you want to accomplish and things that you know you can sustain, while also leaving room for discussion about a longer-term vision. So, for instance, if your goal is to get all seniors a 6-week internship, in the summer, that's going to look a lot different than if your goal is perhaps having a district-wide access to career exploration at multiple points during a semester. So, you're able to prioritize access over scale, intensity over exploration, and a variety of things that we'll go into more detail. And one tool that might help inspire and guide your thinking around setting your goals and vision for work-based learning is the JFF Work-Based Learning Framework, which we recently created as a way to organize our own thinking as we work with partners, but also underscore the importance of the interrelated components of work-based learning that really reflects a continuum of intensity and commitment when you're thinking about kind of where internships fall versus where perhaps job shadows and really initial entry points into the workplace. One thing to note here is that career exploration is indeed really the foundation that undergirds all subsequent forms of work-based learning. In many ways, we feel that this really informs the success of work-based learning in later years, toward the later years of high school and beyond, and helps students maximize experiences that progressively build upon one another. Relatedly, we like to emphasize career exploration because we think it's important to delineate the experiences that are taking place in an actual workplace that are paid and longer term from experiences that are more shorter term or perhaps not occurring in a workplace, so that we begin to think of true work-based learning experiences that take place at the more intensive phases of this framework as a way to orient your goals and vision, and really understand that when we're talking about internships and on-the-job training and apprenticeship, that it is a much higher level of commitment from both employers and from students themselves, and perhaps may require a lot more resources and staff support to effectively implement. The last thing I'll say about the framework, as you're thinking about designing work-based learning experiences, you should think of this framework as very permeable, so that a student could be in a career and technical education pathway and be very far along within this framework in one career area, but also still want to explore different industries or occupations. And so thinking of ways that students can kind of simultaneously make headway in one area while leaving open opportunities to perhaps return to a career exploration phase that might help them kind of inform their post-secondary path. And there are a lot of examples that we've seen in the field of places articulating their vision for work-based learning, and this is an example from the state of Tennessee that has really dedicated a lot of state-level resources and personnel to support work-based learning at the local level. And so we just wanted to give you an example of how the kind of grain size of a goal or vision statement could be. But, and again, this could be used as a template at any level, but relatedly, you'll see on the next slide that to couple the vision and goals of work-based learning in the state of Tennessee, they've also articulated kind of the conditions that need to be in place or what other action steps need to take place in order to meet that vision and those goals. So again, here an example that you can use in your own community with a group of cross-sector stakeholders who will be likely involved in implementing work-based learning. But again, that can provide a very high-level guiding vision for the work moving forward. So, you know, why it's important to articulate goals and vision of work-based learning. I think, as I mentioned before, it can be so hard to focus on this type of activity when there's so much to do from an administrative and logistical standpoint with respect to work-based learning. But as we've seen in the field, it's really important to almost have a mission statement that stakeholders can refer back to, especially in the face of staff turnover, funding changes, and as the program grows and evolves, making sure there's a shared understanding of what the collective ecosystem of stakeholders are working toward will help minimize any disruptions as changes are inevitably likely to occur. And this is especially important when recruiting employers. It's very helpful for educators and intermediaries to be very clear about what they're asking employers of their involvement and be able to show how their involvement will be contributing to these goals, but also be mutually beneficial for their own company's goals as well as the economic development of the region.
Thanks, Sheila. So I'm going to talk through the second key component of work-based learning implementation, and that's the staff and supports that work together to create an infrastructure to facilitate quality work-based learning experiences. So this infrastructure likely looks pretty different depending on where you are, the kind of work you're doing in your local context. But regardless of those things, what we find most effective is when there are tailored supports to the two main stakeholders in work-based learning implementation, the students and the employers. So there are some organizations and some individual roles that tend to be more student-facing. These might be organizations like schools or out-of-school time youth-serving organizations. On the individual level, these are typically teachers, counselors, career counselors. There are then some organizations that are more employer-facing than they are student-facing. This might be a chamber of commerce, a workforce development board. And then in the middle, you'll see on the graphic that we have up here, there are many organizations and roles that cross over, so either by design or by necessity once the work gets started. So for example, a work-based learning coordinator might be working directly with students, but also be responsible for certain pieces of employer engagement activities that their community has set out to do. So as we talk through our presentation today, you'll hear us use employer and student-facing as a term that helps us and will hopefully help you organize this work. So where we'll start is with career exploration here at the bottom. And you see we have a little tagline up here, we're too often focused on the finish line before we learn to tie our running shoes. We really are, I think, guilty ourselves of often thinking about work-based learning as internships or jobs. Those are typically top of mind, and they're really powerful examples, which we will get to later today. But there are critical skill building and relationship building activities that come before those sorts of experiences that happen during this career exploration phase. And an investment in time and activities in the career exploration phase ensures that both students and employers are able to take advantage of and maximize those more time-intensive and higher stakes experiences like internships. We know that just dropping a student into an internship without significant preparation comes with challenges for both a student and an employer. So it serves everyone involved to thoughtfully incorporate career exploration work into a student's overall experience. And these are the things that tend to be more low impact for employers and a nice place to start if you're engaging with them. So what is this phase and what does it look like? In career exploration activities, young people are able to increase their awareness of career options and build a strong foundation for successful work-based learning. It's designed to provide that foundation, not necessarily to build skills for a particular job or occupation. It does not often occur in a workplace, so these are activities that can happen in a school setting or an out-of-school time youth-serving organization. Some models we see in this phase are career fairs, industry projects, career speakers, and mock interviews. And included in the scope of responsibilities for someone who is a student-facing person in this phase, they may be preparing students to make the most of a career fair by facilitating research activities ahead of time in the classroom. They may be creating a scavenger hunt so that students can use that while they're experiencing a career fair. And they may be working with students following the career fair to write a professional thank you email, for example, to someone they met at the fair, or they're working with them to reach out on LinkedIn to someone they met at the career fair. An employer-facing support person is engaging employers for the career fair, working with them, figuring out what they need to bring, what sorts of questions they should be prepared for from the young people that they're interacting with, and providing any follow-up work with the employers as well. Some examples that we've seen in the field and that we really like. This is an example from District 214, which is the second largest school district in Illinois. They're doing some really robust work-based learning at a district level. They host career nights for both students and parents, where they invite professional folks from their different pathway areas, and students and parents are able to choose 2 presentations to sit in on, and then they attend a one-on-one networking session at the end of the evening, this is a really nice opportunity for young people and their families to learn about the different pathway areas in their school or their district, and then help them become better prepared to make informed decisions when they're choosing which area to pursue. Likely many of you on the phone who've worked directly in schools have seen career interest surveys, and this is another example from our friends in the Long Beach Unified School District of a career exploration activity that's targeted towards middle school students. This is the survey that they've used with their students. And we steer clear of attaching ages or grade levels to phases of the framework that we use, but we do think that taking career awareness seriously in middle school helps students think and learn and process different careers, and empowers them with information about those careers and insight into their own interests so they can make intentional choices in high school and beyond. It's also allowing them early opportunities to begin to develop a career identity that may be in an area that they're previously unfamiliar with. And this is a flyer for the career fair that can be used to recruit both students and employers for participation. The next phase of the framework that we will focus on is career exposure, and this is similar to career exploration in many ways, but the key difference, at least from my perspective, and I think from JFF as well, is that in this phase, students and young people are able to experience the world of work firsthand. So they're seeing the work environment, they're able to touch different tools, they're able to observe professional communication and professional meetings, maybe a professional phone call, and learn a lot from that first-hand experience. They're typically characterized by short periods of time and with the goal of gaining, again, introductory information. Models we see in this phase are job shadowing, company or workplace tours, informational interviews, and mentoring. Some student-facing supports in this phase are around student matching. For example, if you're planning for a job shadow day, doing a lot of work preparing students for that day and figuring out their interests and where they might be best fit, and then also working with employers on the other side of things to guide them on creating a job shadow day schedule, and then also figuring out any paperwork that they might need to share with students in advance. On the left is an example from the Boston Private Industry Council, and this is probably an employer-facing document that shows the benefits of participating in Job Shadow Day. And then on the right, you have an example of a Job Shadow Day agenda that the PIC helped facilitate with SAP and Jobs for the Future with Charlestown High School, which is a large comprehensive high school here in Massachusetts. The next phase that we'll focus on is the career engagement phase, and this is described as the phase where students have sustained experience in a workplace. So they're developing relationships with adults, they're consistently able to practice or develop their employability skills, they're gaining new technical skills, they're making meaning of their classroom learning as it relates to the world of work in a specific industry or career. They're in a position to build relationships with adults in the workplace setting, supervisors and coworkers, and are able to build their own networks and social capital, and also able to seek feedback on their performance. We think of this phase maybe as the internship phase, and from my own experience as a career specialist here in Boston, and then on the other end of things as an employer of youth here in Boston as well, I know that connecting young people to opportunities in professional settings requires a lot of work, and there is significant time spent on both the student-facing and employer-facing support side. For your work with students, there are a lot of logistics, whether it's helping students complete an online application, ensuring students have the proper documentation to work and to receive pay for their work, working with them to identify the right IDs that they need, ensuring permission slips are signed, managing work permits. There's a lot of paperwork that goes into connecting a young person to an internship opportunity. And then on top of that, there's a lot of preparation, of course, to ensure that they are best set up for success in taking advantage of an internship. On the employer side, someone who's working with employers might be organized in managing an interview schedule. They may be helping them create job descriptions or helping them navigate language for confidentiality agreements, other liability concerns, and navigating some payroll questions that might come up. There's significant, we see in the field, a lot of questions that employers have if they've never hired high school age students before, particularly around liability, and that's something that we see intermediaries and other employer-facing folks being able to help with. There also might be situations that require relationship building or strategic support or even crisis management with employers and students. For employers that are new to hosting young people and for students that are new to the world of work, there are bound to be some difficult and potentially unexpected situations that come up that you, even with your best intentions, might not have completely prepared for. So this is another reason why we think it's so valuable to have dedicated staff to support these kinds of activities and their participants. This is an example from the West Michigan Internship Initiative. They've created an internship initiative toolkit, which is publicly available, and you can check that out. It has a robust toolkit in there, and it details the sorts of things required to make an internship happen and provides really quality resources related to those activities. So what you see here are sample interview questions that they share with their employer partners who are going to be interviewing youth. And I really like what they have here at the bottom, this note that questions you ask potential employees who just happen to be young people shouldn't be that dramatically different from the sorts of questions you ask your adult employees, really setting the expectation early on that a high school student should be expected to perform and behave in the same way as that an adult employee would. We get a lot of questions about measurement for work-based learning and internships in particular, and we know that this is an area of growth for the field in general, something that we're still thinking through, but wanted to share this example from Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Work-Based Learning Plan is a tool that's used across the state to measure both technical and employability skill development during a young person's work-based learning experience. I've used this tool myself in 2 different roles, the first as a career counselor, supporting a student employee, and the second as an employer of the student. And in both instances, I found that it was a really powerful tool for evaluation, but it was most effective when it was used as a tool to facilitate a feedback conversation between a supervisor or manager and a student. We know even as adults that feedback conversations can be difficult to have, and if we're setting our young people up early on to be comfortable with having those conversations, it's a really important thing. So I'd advocate for anyone who uses this kind of skill development assessment in their own work to prioritize its use as an in-person conversation starter. And the final phase of the work-based learning framework is career experience. And these are experiences where participants gain specific skills and a paid work experience in a particular industry or occupation, characterized most often by models like apprenticeship. Apprenticeships are an example of long-term sustained jobs where participants are gaining really specific technical skills. Apprenticeships are highly structured and intensive experiences, which calls for an even more significant investment and support from employers and students. If those of you who are familiar with apprenticeships know, they require wraparound services, and so for student-facing supports, that might be figuring out transportation, providing academic advising and tutoring services, financial literacy support to ensure that the student is thriving in their apprenticeship experience. On the employer side, as employer-facing person will work with industry to ensure that the academic school-based curriculum is aligned with and complemented by the work experience, that what's happening in the classroom is what the employer or industry needs in that moment, and that they're also working with the employer to ensure that they are endeavoring to figure out how to support and incentivize workers to stay on and transition into full-time employment. This is an example of an employer-facing support for youth apprenticeship. Here, the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development is supporting employers by providing a timeline for youth apprenticeship planning. The youth apprenticeship programs we see across states have quite a full calendar of activities and tasks to prepare, plan, and implement a youth apprenticeship program. And we know that employers often need a lot of support in understanding the full breadth of what goes into making an apprenticeship work. We see states like Georgia and this example from Wisconsin that have been able to scale these programs across the state, but again, it requires a lot of time and investment and commitment from employers. But we know that data around apprenticeship shows that it has a high return on investment and productivity for employers that are involved. This is an example also from the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. It's a skills standards checklist. This is for work with students and for them to understand. This is from an IT pathway. And this is a way to rate them on their development across a wide variety of IT skills, and specifically here it's hardware units.
Okay, so that was a lot of the inner workings. I think once you have a work-based learning program kind of envisioned and you have the people in place to really execute it. But the third key component that we've identified with respect to overall work-based learning implementation is employer partnerships. Because you can't have work-based learning without a workplace, so it's important to identify employers that really are willing and ready to open young people to their workplace, but also seeing this as a separate category that needs to be maintained and sustained on an ongoing basis, so that you're continuing to think of growing your employer ecosystem, growing partnerships, and building kind of a regional infrastructure of employers that can tap into their next generation of talent. And so we have a few strategies and tips to consider as you're thinking about reaching out to employers and building that network. The first is really taking stock of what's already happening, identifying the growth industries in your region, connecting with the Chamber of Commerce to understand kind of what occupations are really growing in that region, what job openings are happening, and really understanding kind of what employers are already doing with respect to community investment. What schools are they already partnering with? Are they kind of engaging more at the elementary school level already? Are they, do they have a really strong employee volunteerism program? So that you can sort of be familiar with this type of information before you are reaching out to employers as a way to better be informed about what might work with them in terms of a recruitment strategy, but also so you can let them know that you've done your homework as well. And moving on, so back to those goals and vision, another reason why it's so important is because, at the onset of employer partnership, it may seem like, you're really asking a lot of them. So it's important to have some, firm standing around what work-based learning in your region or your community is really designed to do. And that will help clarify for employers what level of commitment they're able to provide at different levels or at this kind of current point in time, and create a shared understanding of what those goals are. This also is a good place for you as an educator or an intermediary to think about your non-negotiables. What do you want to lead with when you're talking about employers? If ultimately when students are in internships, they have to be paid, what would need to happen from the employer perspective to reach that goal? And lastly, no, that's it. Next, moving on. As I said before, it's helpful also to use the work-based learning framework as a communication tool with employers, because so often I think sometimes just having very specific examples for employers to be able to visualize what a type of engagement might look like This here is an industry menu that one of our partners in California created as a way to paint that picture for employers. And we've mapped on our framework to show where the different levels of engagement might fall. The other key piece that we're hearing a lot in the field is this notion of a return on investment. So often employers, move much faster than the education world and really need to see how this investment is going to pay off in terms of their bottom line, but also just generally what other benefits might they receive as a result of engaging with education in this way. And on the left are two examples from a organization here in Boston that has been able to quantify some of these returns on investment in terms of employee turnover, time to productivity, once you hire an intern to become a full-time employee. We've also seen certain studies that have measured employee engagement and job satisfaction when current employees are able to interact with young people. And then on the right is another example from the Boston Private Industry Council that has really just clearly and simply mapped out the cost of what it would mean to hire a high school intern for the summer at the various pay scales. And this has been really helpful from what we hear, that employers are able to see that, when you look at the number 2,000, that seems somewhat like a drop in the bucket when, during the summer months, so much of their staff may be on vacation, and some of that cost can be recouped through a summer intern. Before I talk about some just specific examples, I also would want to spend this time just to encourage partners in the field to really emphasize that when recruiting employers for work-based learning, emphasize that this is an opportunity for them over a cost. We're seeing more and more that employers are really struggling to recruit the right talent, and so working with high school students really is an opportunity for them to train and meet their future workforce. So, while yes, in some ways you're asking them to invest time and money in ways that they may not currently be comfortable with, you're also providing a huge service by connecting them with their future workers. And so we also wanted to just give a few examples of some creative and small or low impact ways that we've seen educators and intermediaries begin the recruitment process. Here in Boston, for example, we enlist the support of the mayor to really put pressure on employers through a call-a-thon. And so that's, again, a way to think about actors and stakeholders in your region that may not be directly involved with implementing work-based learning, but certainly have influence and are highly visible to employers that might be able to help with some of that recruitment. The other thing that sometimes isn't always brought to the forefront when we think about possible employers that can help provide work-based learning experiences is the school itself. And in many communities, we find that the school district is sometimes the largest employer. So we've seen really creative and effective work-based learning experiences on school sites or within the district's central offices.
All right. Thanks, Sheila. So that concludes our overview of the key components of work-based learning implementation. And so we thought we would just spend a few minutes here at the end pulling out some key lessons that we hope that you take with you into your Thursday afternoon. So what did we learn about goals and vision? We learned that setting your goal and vision is important for building buy-in, but for also for creating a type of mission statement that folks can return to as programs build, as they scale and change. Just a quick anecdote, we're working with a community here in Boston, and they are moving very, very quickly and implementing a lot of work-based learning activities, but they have found it useful as the new folks get added to the steering committee and new employers come on board to orient them to their vision statement as a way of kind of level setting what their mission and vision is for the work. So it does take a lot of time at the beginning, and we like to think of it as a down payment on ensuring the type of quality and growth that your community wants to see in the long term. It's also really helpful for organizing people around a larger vision that encompasses a range of education and economic goals. Around staff and supports, we again want to reiterate that it's useful to think about designing supports to be student-facing and employer-facing. The work-based learning framework is a really versatile tool, and we hope you can use it in a variety of ways, but it can help you identify where to deploy your staff and your resources. It's also a helpful tool as a guiding document when you're aligning staff around your goals and visions. We've also seen it used in some cases as a document that when folks are doing a landscape scan or doing a map of existing work-based learning initiatives, they often map their existing initiatives against the work-based learning framework, and they can see where they have strengths and where they may have some opportunity to grow to ensure that a young person is experiencing the full comprehensive work-based learning framework. And finally, around employer relationships, it's important to take stock early on of your regional employer activity. We don't want to be reinventing the wheel. Aligning your employer partnerships and activities with your goals and vision is something that is really helpful in ensuring that everyone's working towards the same thing. And then again, just this reminder of applying effective messaging around the return on investment. There are many creative ways to do that, but we know that it serves folks well when they're able to have those kinds of conversations with their industry partners. And it does take a long time, and building any kind of relationship is a process, but we encourage you to stay the course. So with some of the time that we have left, we'll open it up to questions. If you have a question, if you could just put it in the chat box and make sure it's sent to everyone so that we can see the questions that are submitted. We'll give folks a couple minutes to think through questions and submit in about a minute or so.
Okay, so we know that was a lot of information all at once. So there's, if there aren't any burning questions at this moment, that is completely fine. We are continuously building to this deck specifically, so also any feedback about what types of information would be helpful, as well as kind of suggestions for ways to frame the discussion, and really just also hearing specifically what your work on the ground looks like and the challenges that you're facing on a day-to-day basis would be really helpful for us to learn about, and, you know, if there's any way we can help problem solve as well. So we will probably wrap it up here, and again, this webinar will be posted on the website as well as the recording, and feel free to reach out to either Julia or me with any specific questions, or if you want links to any of the resources that we mentioned in the webinar, we're happy to share, and hope to continue the conversation, and wish you all the best of luck implementing work-based learning on the ground.
And thank you,
all
Julia
right.
and Sheila. Thank you very much. You guys did a great job. And just send me the presentation, and I'll post it on the COP.
Okay.
All right.
That sounds great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.